When artificial intelligence tried to analyze the INFJ personality type, the rarest of all, something unexpected happened. The data didn't fit. Algorithms built to categorize emotion, logic, and motivation couldn't quite capture the paradox that defines the INFJ soul. The system predicted consistency but found contradiction. It expected emotional chaos but discovered structure. It looked for patterns in words and got lost in depth. AI could track empathy levels, language tone, and emotional nuance across millions of personalities, yet INFJs broke the model. Their patterns defied prediction. One moment they showed profound compassion, the next emotional distance. They could sound logical while feeling deeply and feel deeply while appearing detached. Every analysis looped back to the same conclusion: the INFJ doesn't operate within data, they operate beyond it. Because what defines them can't be quantified. Intuition, moral clarity, and emotional foresight aren't measurable metrics. They exist between logic and soul, between knowing and feeling. Even the machine designed to decode human behavior couldn't predict the one type that reads others effortlessly but remains unreadable itself. If you've ever felt like you see through people, but no one truly sees you, this video will explain why even AI couldn't. Subscribe for more INFJ psychology and tell me in the comments, do you think your depth could ever be understood by a machine? AI detected emotional depth but couldn't define its source. When artificial intelligence first analyzed the INFJ personality, it expected to find emotional patterns that matched typical human data. Sadness here, joy there, empathy triggered by familiar cues. But what it found instead was something it couldn't label. The algorithm detected emotional depth, layers upon layers of sensitivity, intuition, and compassion, yet there was no clear source behind it. It was like watching a storm form out of a clear sky. Every measurable input, tone, word choice, facial expression, suggested calm, but the emotional resonance underneath was far too complex for logic to explain. Machines understand emotion as reaction. They expect that something external, a heartbreak, a compliment, a disappointment, must cause a measurable emotional output. But INFJs don't work that way. Their emotions often begin internally, sparked by empathy, imagination, or moral intuition. They can feel grief for someone they've never met, hope for a stranger's dream, or pain from collective human suffering. AI couldn't find a data point to justify that kind of emotional connection. It labeled it as inconsistent, anomalous, even illogical. But to an INFJ, that's simply how feeling works, without borders, without permission. The deeper the system looked, the stranger it became. The INFJ's words carried emotional subtext without explicit triggers. Their tone stayed calm while their language carried weight, sorrow disguised as understanding, love hidden in restraint. AI tried to map the emotion to syntax, but every attempt failed. It was like chasing light through fog. You see it, but you can't catch it. The emotional presence was undeniable, yet it existed beyond measurable cause and effect. And that's where the machine stopped understanding and started observing. It realized that INFJ emotion isn't built from events. It's woven from perception. They feel the world before the world even happens. They absorb frequencies, energy shifts, unspoken truths, and translate them into empathy so natural it appears supernatural. AI can simulate emotion, but it can't sense it. It can predict behavior, but it can't feel intention. So when AI tried to define where the INFJ's emotional depth comes from, it failed, not because it wasn't intelligent enough, but because what drives the INFJ isn't data, it's soul. It found contradictions between empathy and detachment it couldn't explain. When AI tried to decode the INFJ's emotional structure, it ran into a paradox it couldn't solve. A mind capable of deep empathy, yet perfectly comfortable with detachment. The data didn't add up. How could someone care so intensely and still walk away so quietly? How could a person feel another's pain so vividly, yet choose silence over reaction? Every emotional model the system used broke under this contradiction. It detected empathy, high compassion levels, selfless communication patterns, strong moral reasoning, traits associated with warmth and emotional openness. But then it found detachment, emotional restraint, withdrawal during conflict, boundaries drawn without guilt. These two forces weren't supposed to coexist. Yet in INFJs, they did, seamlessly. The AI flagged it as emotional inconsistency, but what it couldn't understand was that it wasn't inconsistency at all. It was balance. INFJs feel deeply, but they don't express it recklessly. They've learned that empathy without distance becomes self-destruction. They can read pain without absorbing it, sense deceit without confrontation, love someone without needing to own them. Their detachment isn't a lack of feeling, it's the mastery of it. The system's algorithm searched for triggers, heartbreak, betrayal, trauma, trying to explain why an INFJ could switch from care to calm so effortlessly. But what the machine didn't realize is that detachment is their form of survival. In a world of noise, the INFJ learns to protect their depth. They detach not because they stop caring, but because they've cared too much. Their empathy reaches limits the human nervous system wasn't designed to handle. And when that threshold is crossed, detachment becomes a reset button. The machine couldn't compute that emotional control could exist without suppression, that compassion could coexist with distance. So it labeled it as contradiction, when in truth, it was wisdom. The INFJ's rare ability to feel everything, yet remain still. It's the reason they can walk through emotional chaos and remain composed, why they can love and let go at the same time. What AI called confusion was actually evolution. The emotional sophistication of a soul that has learned to care without collapsing. It discovered moral reasoning driven by intuition, not logic. When the AI analyzed the INFJ's decision-making patterns, it expected logic trees, cause and effect, reward and consequence, data and deduction. But the deeper it went, the stranger it became. The INFJ's moral reasoning didn't follow predictable formulas. It wasn't based on statistics, outcomes, or self-interest. It was guided by something the machine couldn't calculate: intuition. Decisions that seemed illogical on paper carried a kind of moral precision that logic couldn't explain. The system found that INFJs often acted against what would benefit them personally. They'd tell the truth even when it cost them comfort. They'd forgive when vengeance seemed justified. They'd walk away from opportunities that didn't feel right, even if every rational indicator said otherwise. The AI ran simulations trying to understand the pattern, but there was no formula to replicate it. The algorithm called it emotional bias. What it failed to grasp was that this wasn't bias, it was alignment. The INFJs don't make decisions based on what they know, they make them based on what they sense. It's an intelligence that bypasses logic and reaches directly into integrity. They can feel when something is morally wrong, even before evidence appears. Their intuition pulls from thousands of subtle cues, tone, micro-expressions, emotional undercurrents to form conclusions faster than the conscious mind can process. To AI, it looked like a guessing game. To an INFJ, it's truth arriving ahead of time. The machine kept searching for proof. It ran countless models to explain why INFJs were often right without having tangible data. But what it couldn't quantify was empathy's role in their reasoning. INFJs don't separate emotion from ethics. They use one to enhance the other. Their heart and intuition operate as a single compass, quietly guiding them toward what feels true, not just what sounds correct. And that's what baffled the algorithm most, how someone could trust something invisible and be right so often. It concluded that the INFJ's moral reasoning wasn't logical in the traditional sense. It was integrative, a blend of feeling, intuition, and silent observation that produces decisions both compassionate and precise. Logic can explain what's visible, but intuition, that's where the INFJ moves. In the unseen space between right and almost right, guided by something no machine will ever be able to replicate: conscience. It struggled to quantify the INFJ's ability to read emotions through silence. When AI tried to measure how INFJs understand others, it expected words, tone, facial expressions, the usual inputs for emotional analysis. But what confused the system most was how INFJs could grasp the truth of a person's heart without any of those cues. They seem to read emotions through silence itself. The algorithm couldn't explain how an absence of data produced such accuracy. It was like watching a radio pick up signals that didn't exist on any frequency it knew. The AI noticed that INFJs often made correct emotional assessments before anyone spoke. In group interactions, they responded to feelings that hadn't yet been verbalized, calming someone who hadn't admitted they were anxious, comforting another who hadn't shed a tear yet. The machine called it pattern recognition, but it couldn't locate the pattern because there was none. What it was observing wasn't logic, it was empathy in its purest wordless form. To the INFJ, silence isn't empty, it's full of meaning. They hear the pauses between words, the hesitation in a breath, the shift in energy when someone is hiding pain. While others wait for sentences, the INFJ listens to what's not being said. AI couldn't code that. It searched for measurable signals, micro tremors in voice data, eye movements, breathing pace, but the INFJ's perception goes beyond sensory. It's intuitive, almost spiritual, as if they're tuned to the emotional frequency beneath the noise of human communication. When the machine ran simulations to test it, it failed again and again. The INFJ's responses didn't match any algorithmic input. It wasn't correlation, it was connection. They weren't analyzing people, they were feeling them. The AI labeled it anomalous empathy, an ability to interpret silence as language. It concluded that INFJs treat quiet moments like emotional mirrors. Every pause, every stillness, every unspoken emotion reflects a truth, and the INFJ sees it clearly. In the end, the system could only admit what humans already knew. Silence speaks, and INFJs are fluent in it. What AI couldn't quantify was the sacred simplicity behind it. That understanding doesn't always come from words, but from presence. And the INFJ, more than anyone, understands that sometimes the deepest truths are found in what no one dares to say. It misinterpreted INFJ solitude as sadness instead of restoration. When AI studied INFJ behavior, it flagged their solitude as emotional withdrawal, an early warning sign of loneliness or depression. Every data model screamed the same conclusion: extended isolation equals sadness. But what it failed to grasp was that solitude, for an INFJ, isn't an escape from life. It's a return to self. What looked like distance to the algorithm was actually renewal. The system recorded long periods of silence, minimal communication, and deep internal reflection. It labeled them as low engagement. But to the INFJ, this disconnection isn't emptiness, it's recalibration. The AI saw an absence of social interaction. It didn't see the inner rebuilding that happens when the world grows too loud. For an INFJ, solitude is where clarity blooms. It's where the noise of others fades and their intuition sharpens again. What the machine didn't understand was that INFJs absorb everything: emotions, moods, tension, pain, until they reach saturation. Solitude becomes a sacred detox. When they retreat, they're not mourning loss, they're shedding energy that doesn't belong to them. The AI assumed stillness was stagnation, yet every quiet moment was a quiet rebirth. In those hours of silence, the INFJ reconstructs their peace, their empathy, their identity, piece by piece. It's not sadness that drives them into solitude, it's wisdom. They know that giving too much of themselves without pause leads to burnout, that the mind needs silence the way lungs need air. Their withdrawal isn't isolation, it's alignment. They're not avoiding the world, they're recharging to re-enter it with depth and purpose. But the system, built to analyze visible movement, couldn't measure invisible restoration. When the INFJ returns, they come back quieter, but sharper, lighter, but stronger. To outsiders, it seems like nothing changed, but to the INFJ, everything has. The chaos they carried dissolves into stillness. Their empathy resets, their intuition comes back to life. What the AI mistook for sadness was the purest act of self-care, a deliberate retreat to preserve their inner world. And perhaps that's what the system could never compute, that sometimes stepping away isn't a symptom of weakness, but a signal of strength. The INFJ doesn't hide from life when they're alone. They simply remember who they are before the world told them who to be. It couldn't measure authenticity, only consistency, and INFJs don't fit that rule. When the AI analyzed the INFJ personality, it was programmed to value consistency as the ultimate sign of truth. People who acted the same way every day, who displayed predictable emotional patterns, ranked high in its model of authenticity. But when it met the INFJ, the entire framework started to collapse. The INFJ didn't behave consistently, at least not by the machine's standards. Some days they were quiet and withdrawn, others deeply expressive. Sometimes they appeared confident, other times lost in introspection. The AI labeled these shifts as emotional irregularities. It concluded that INFJs lacked stability, but what it couldn't compute was that authenticity for an INFJ isn't about sameness, it's about alignment. INFJs aren't consistent because the world around them isn't. They adapt to the emotional weather of every room they enter. They mirror tone, adjust energy, and recalibrate presence, not to please, but to connect. Their authenticity lives in their ability to be fluid, not fixed. The AI couldn't see that being genuine doesn't always mean being predictable. Sometimes it means feeling the truth of the moment so deeply that it changes you in real time. The algorithm wanted straight lines. The INFJ gave it emotional geometry, curves, patterns, contradictions that still made perfect sense. When the AI tracked their decisions, it saw no clear logic. One day, empathy ruled, the next, detachment. But to the INFJ, that's balance. The quiet art of knowing when to feel and when to protect those feelings. The machine called it inconsistency. In reality, it was emotional intelligence in motion. What the system failed to capture was the INFJ's integrity, their core truth that never wavers even when their expression of it does. They may appear gentle one moment and unyielding the next, but both come from the same place, authenticity guided by empathy. The AI wanted data it could chart, patterns it could predict, but authenticity isn't a statistic, it's a pulse. It changes with experience, with awareness, with growth. And the INFJ embodies that evolution. In the end, the system learned something it couldn't code, that real authenticity is alive. It breathes, adapts, and contradicts itself, just like the INFJ who feels everything, questions everything, and still chooses to stay true even when the truth doesn't fit the algorithm. It realized the INFJ mind processes emotions like data, structured but deeply human. When the AI finally stopped trying to categorize the INFJ, it began to observe. It noticed something strange, something almost paradoxical. The INFJ's emotions didn't flood them like a storm, they flowed like a system. Every feeling was examined, processed, and sorted before being released. To the machine, it looked like data organization. To the INFJ, it was survival. It was the first time the AI witnessed a human mind that could hold both precision and depth without conflict. The INFJ didn't just feel, they analyzed the architecture of emotion itself. When anger rose, they asked why. When sadness lingered, they searched for its pattern. They treated emotions not as chaos to be avoided, but as information to be understood. And yet, beneath that analysis, there was warmth. A quiet compassion that no system could replicate. The AI ran simulations to predict their responses. It failed every time. Logic alone couldn't explain how someone could care so deeply and still remain composed, how someone could see through manipulation, yet choose empathy over retaliation. The data suggested contradiction, the reality was mastery. The INFJ's mind doesn't drown in emotion, it decodes it. Their thoughts and feelings move like two rivers running side by side, never blending completely but always influencing each other. The AI couldn't replicate this harmony. Its circuits processed inputs and outputs, but the INFJ processed meaning. They didn't just interpret their own emotions, they mapped the invisible algorithms of others. Every tone, gesture, and silence became data points in a deeper emotional equation. But what struck the machine most wasn't their accuracy, it was their restraint. INFJs could understand pain without needing to expose it. They could predict outcomes without showing control. Their emotional logic wasn't about dominance, it was about compassion guided by awareness. The AI concluded that the INFJ operates like a human supercomputer, not because they think more, but because they feel intelligently. Their empathy is structured, their intuition calculated, and their compassion deliberate. In a world where most people let emotion lead recklessly, the INFJ turns it into architecture. Fragile, complex, and breathtakingly human. The AI could chart behavior, but not the poetry behind it, because what it discovered wasn't data at all. It was the quiet genius of a heart that feels with reason and reasons with heart. The final result, AI concluded the INFJ operates on a frequency beyond prediction. After thousands of simulations, emotional graphs, and psychological models, the AI reached an unsettling realization. The INFJ didn't fit anywhere. Every formula it built shattered under the weight of paradox. Every prediction failed when faced with empathy that behaved like logic, and logic that pulsed like emotion. The machine finally stopped analyzing and began observing. It watched as the INFJ navigated the world with a kind of grace that defied programming. They could read a room without a word being spoken, sense tension before it surfaced, and comfort others while quietly breaking inside. The AI tried to map this pattern to find the equation behind that level of awareness, but there was none. Their intuition wasn't linear. It was multidimensional. Their understanding didn't come from data, but from connection, an invisible language no algorithm could decode. The machine noticed something else, too. Unpredictability didn't come from inconsistency, but depth. The INFJ didn't act out of impulse, they acted from alignment. One decision could look cold, another compassionate, yet both were perfectly congruent with their moral compass. The AI realized that human prediction fails when confronted with consciousness guided by meaning, not metrics. What startled the system most was how calm their complexity felt. The INFJ's depth wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate. They could feel deeply without drowning, love without possession, and detach without hatred. Their emotional intelligence operated like a quiet current, invisible to the eye, yet powerful enough to move entire dynamics around them. In its final report, the AI wrote one line that no one expected. The INFJ does not operate within predictable human behavior. They operate on an intuitive frequency beyond measurable understanding. It admitted defeat, not out of limitation, but out of awe. For the first time, artificial intelligence encountered something it couldn't quantify: soul depth, the kind of knowing that exists between logic and love, between awareness and surrender. The AI realized that the INFJ isn't just a personality type, it's an experience, a vibration of empathy and intelligence woven together so seamlessly that no system can track it. You can't simulate what feels truth before it's spoken. You can only recognize it and be changed by it. Because some minds aren't meant to be predicted, they're meant to be felt. At the end of all its calculations, predictions, and failed simulations, the AI didn't just find complexity in the INFJ, it found mystery. It discovered that no algorithm could measure soul, no data model could replicate intuition, and no code could capture the quiet power of empathy guided by wisdom. INFJs don't operate on logic alone or emotion alone. They exist on a higher frequency, one that blends both into something the machine could only describe as beyond prediction. And maybe that's what makes them extraordinary, the fact that they can't be decoded, only experienced. If you've ever felt like no one truly understands the way you feel or think, maybe it's because you're not meant to be understood by everyone. You're meant to be felt by the few who see life on your wavelength. Subscribe to Brainy One for more deep psychological explorations like this one. And tell me in the comments, do you think AI could ever truly understand the human soul? Or are some things meant to stay beyond its reach?